In the closing decades of the 19th century, warfare was changing faster than at any time since the invention of gunpowder. Black powder was disappearing, volley fire was giving way to aimed fire, industrialized nations were racing towards repeating rifles, smokeless powder, and modern logistics. But the US Army, fresh off the Indian Wars and still relying on Civil War-era doctrine, was behind. And the rifle that would drag America into the modern era? The Krag-Jorgensen, a rifle almost nobody talks about anymore. The rifle that quietly dragged the United States out of the black powder era and into the modern age, only to be overshadowed almost immediately by what came next. But for a brief, critical moment, it was the most modern rifle that the United States had ever issued. Before we can understand the Krag, we need to understand what came before it. By the 1880s, the US Army's standard rifle was still the trapdoor Springfield. It is a single-shot, hinged breech rifle firing black powder cartridges. While effective in frontier warfare, the trapdoor has some serious limitations. It shoots one round at a time, the heavy smoke of the black powder obscures the battlefield, and it's slow to reload under pressure. And meanwhile, European armies were moving to repeaters, using smokeless powder and modern battlefield doctrine. The US Army knew it was behind and began formal trials to replace the trapdoor. Contenders in the trials were American, European, and others. There's a lot that goes into the lead up and selection of this rifle, and if you're interested in that video, go ahead and let me know below, and I'll start digging. The winning design ultimately came from Norway. It was developed by Ole Krag and Erik Jørgensen. The Krag offers excellent reliability, exceptional smoothness. Even today, this action's a dream. And it offers controlled feeding with rimmed cartridges. The biggest feature of this rifle is definitely the side-loading magazine gate. We'll talk about that more in a bit. In 1892, the rifle was officially adopted by the United States, and production started at the Springfield Armory. For the first time in history, every American infantryman would carry a repeating bolt-action rifle. Why not a lever gun? That's for another video. If you're interested, let me know below. Before we get into the rifle more, let's talk about smokeless powder. You see, black powder has three basic ingredients: sulfur, charcoal, and potassium nitrate. It works well enough, but I would say it has 4 defining limits. 1, low energy density. You need large amounts of powder for modest velocity. 2, heavy fouling. After just a few shots of black powder, barrels and actions get heavily caked with residue. 3, smoke clouds. After a volley is fired, you can't see the enemy or your allies. If you don't believe me, go to a reenactment. And 4, corrosion. Black powder residue attracts moisture and eats steel alive. And now, as we enter the 1880s, rifles are becoming more accurate, faster to reload, and mechanically advanced. But black powder was holding that advancement back. Armies wanted smaller calibers with higher velocities, flatter trajectories, and faster sustained fire. Black powder simply couldn't deliver. And the breakthrough didn't come from gunsmiths. It came from chemists. In the mid-1800s, scientists discovered that cellulose, like cotton or wood pulp, when combined with nitric and sulfuric acid, becomes nitrocellulose, or gun cotton. This material had enormous energy potential. But the early gun cotton had a problem. It was very unstable. Instead of burning smoothly, it often detonated, which, if you don't know, is catastrophic inside of a mechanical object. So for decades, the nitrocellulose was just too dangerous to use, until one man solved that problem. In 1884, a French chemist that we'll call Paul V, because I probably can't say his real name right. It's like Paul Vieille, I don't know, I'm sorry French. He cracked the code. He discovered how to stabilize nitrocellulose by dissolving it into a gelatinized form and shaping it into thin sheets or flakes, thus enabling the substance to be burned controllably rather than exploding. And he called it powder B, but spelled like a French person would spell powder. And powder B was the world's first practical smokeless powder. It had 3 times the energy of black powder, created almost no smoke, caused considerably far less fouling inside of the weapon, and it would allow for higher velocities with less powder and a lighter projectile. France immediately understood that they just developed a superweapon. And in 1886, they combined powder bee with the first modern rifle, the Lebel. After that night, every black powder army on Earth became obsolete. Once France revealed their smokeless powder, Europe panicked. Every single major power realized that if they didn't adopt smokeless powder immediately, they would lose their next war. Germany, Britain, Austria-Hungary, Russia, the United States, all scrambled to either develop or license their own formula for smokeless powder. And this led to the next evolution. Mr. Nobel, yes, that Nobel, took smokeless powder even further. He took nitrocellulose with its structure and burn control and combined it with nitroglycerin, adding even more energy potential. He called it ballistite, the first double-base smokeless powder. It had a higher energy output, more efficient burn, and better performance in shorter barrels. Britain was able to refine what Nobel had created even further and called it cordite, which powered British rifles and machine guns for decades. It burned very hot, causing throat erosion, but armies were willing to deal with that because nothing else came close to it in performance. And now that everybody had gotten rid of their black powder, an entire new generation of firearms was created. Calibers dropped from 58 and 45, like this, down to 30 caliber, and even smaller. Pressures skyrocketed, actions had to be stronger, bullets needed metal jackets instead of just being a lead, and barrels no longer needed to be ridiculously long and able to burn their powder. We saw the conception of the Mauser rifles in the 1893 and 1898, the Mosin-Nagant, and yes, the Krag-Jorgensen. Without smokeless powder, none of these rifles make sense. None of them exist. With smokeless powder being so controllable, engineers were able to even further refine velocities and burn rates by changing the grain shape, like flakes, sheets, balls, the grain size, and even apply surface deterrent coatings. This is why smokeless powder can generate the velocities that black powder never could and never would. It's where chemistry enters mechanical work, which I love. It's very Meritism. Talking about this makes me want to go even deeper and make a full TISM video on smokeless powders. So if you're not already subscribed, go ahead and do so. Got a lot coming. Like I mentioned earlier, the Krag's defining feature is this side-loading magazine gate. It's hinged on the bottom, so it opens out away from the weapon. It has a curved internal track with a rotary feeding path. Cartridges are loaded one at a time through this gate. You just kind of shove them in there, close it. Why this was important in the 1890s is because rimmed cartridges often have problems like rim lock and just inconsistent stacking that causes failures to feed. If you've ever shot a .22 pistol like this P322 here with a vertical magazine, the rim on the back of the .22 stacking up inside of the magazine often screws everything up and it will jam. This is a jam-o-matic. And the Krag's side-loading magazine eliminates that completely. It has extraordinarily smooth feeding, no rim lock, cartridges can be added one at a time, and you can load it without having to open the bolt like on other designs. From an engineering perspective, absolutely beautiful. But engineering excellence does not always survive combat realities. You see, the Krag's magazine works flawlessly, slowly. Unlike Mauser rifles, like what comes after this, this is a Springfield 1903. You open the bolt, and then you would take, actually don't have a 30-06 stripper clip here, but you take a stripper clip, like these 855s or 7.62 stripper clips here. You put it in the stripper clip cut, and then you shove all your rounds down at once. The Krag-Jorgensen doesn't do that. You put them in one at a time through the side gate. So it's a lot slower. In a static firing line, this wasn't disastrous, but in modern warfare, it was a liability. When the Krag went to war in the Spanish-American War, it fought famous battles in Cuba, like San Juan Hill and El Caney. Just to draw you a picture, this isn't European farmland like we would see in World War I. It's thick jungle and scrub, rolling hills, intense heat and humidity, which gave way to steep and exposed advances under fire in many cases. The combat ended up being chaotic, exhausting, and very revealing. On the range or on a parade ground, the side gate was very clever. Open the gate, drop rounds in, smooth, reliable feeding, easy to top off. But when the rifle went to war, it faced Spanish using 1893 Mausers. They would fire 5 rounds, open their bolt, shove 5 more in, shoot 5 more rounds. Back in the fight in seconds. Americans had to open their side gate, insert a cartridge one at a time for 5 rounds, then close the gate. When you're in combat doing this, it's pretty slow. Not a little slow. Life or death slow. I mean, just think about it with your Mauser. Fire 5 times. Ammo. Fire 5 times. Ammo. Not so much with the Krag. This is like fire 2, maybe throw 1 in. Fire 3, load a couple more, fire again. This broke unit level volley timing, suppressive fire coordination, and ultimately command control. Couldn't tell who was up or empty, and soldiers often had to break cover, sight picture, and situational awareness to get their rifle topped off. Someone using a Mauser could stay in the prone with their rifle vertical and keep their eyes forward. And all that matters when bullets are flying overhead. Where stripper clips could reduce your mental load during reload, the Krag increased your mental load. I was reading through after-action reports from the Battle of San Juan Hill, and American soldiers were surprised by the rate of fire that the Spanish could uphold due to them being able to reload so much more efficiently. But don't get me wrong, US troops did not think that the Krag was bad, but they noticed that they were outclassed. And that's what mattered. Soldiers on the ground who wrote those after-action reports weren't writing theory papers, they were writing about what almost got them killed. So though America picked a nice rifle, the European nations had more rapid sustained fire, faster reloading, and interchangeable clips and chargers. The Krag just had no practical way to compete. I did see an experiment done where on the side of the loading gate here, there was a cut to put a stripper clip, so you would like pop it open, put your stripper clip, shove your ammo, close it. It just never really came to be because we moved to the Mauser design. The 1893 Mausers carried by the Spanish during the war were chambered in 7x57 millimeter, which shot much flatter in trajectory than the 3040 Krag, which is more of an arc to hit its target. The 3040 Krag, also known as the 30 Army, it's the first smokeless powder service round, and it transitions us from the black powder naming conventions. It's a 220 grain round-nosed bullet and flies at about 2,000 feet per second. It has good accuracy and it's very controllable. However, it has that arced trajectory that I was telling you about and poor long-range performance compared to Spitzer bullets. See, it's a round nose. This is a Spitzer, which we'll talk about a lot more in the development of the Springfield 1903. So go ahead and subscribe. So yeah, effectively, Spanish troops could engage us at further ranges during the Spanish-American War, whereas us carrying the Krag had to close the distance under fire. And this meant more casualties because of the weapon we chose to carry into the war. The Army did try to increase the velocity of the Krag to compete with the Mauser rifles it was fighting against, but it ran into more limitations. You see, the Krag is famously smooth, however, it has one bolt lug right here, where most bolt-action rifles have a second one on this side. Having the single bolt lug makes it a lot smoother, but it cannot take as much pressure. So, bolt lugs were cracking when the Army decided that they were going to try to just add more powder. As they were experimenting with different loads, the sights on the Krag were changed like 5 different types, and this is at 1898 with the 1896 sight, which goes out to 1800 meters, and it's just a simple ladder sight, doesn't have any weird turns in it or anything like other models had. That's for a different video. But yeah, so the Army tried to compete with Mauser ballistics and they cracked lugs, leaving an unavoidable conclusion. The Krag had reached the end of its development envelope. At the time where everyone else's rifle technology was accelerating rapidly, this was unacceptable. And the Army just said, the Krag's great, but it's already been outclassed by rapid moving rifle technology. And so the obvious solution was to just get our own Mauser, which we did. But let's talk about the variants of the Krag. The first model was the 1892, which was more of a concept rifle. After that came the 1896, which is what most people picture when they think of the Krag. Like I said, this has 1896 sights on it, even though it's an 1898 receiver. They made the extractor stronger on the 1896, revised bolt internals, improved the magazine cutoff function here on the side, updated how the rear sight was mounted as well as the rear sight, and added this handguard because, believe it or not, the 1892 had an exposed barrel, which is not great for combat. It's more of a sporterized hunting type of thing. Then came the 1898. It has a little bit stronger receiver geometry. They also modified the lug bearing surfaces because besides the lug inside of the chamber, there's also metal here that butts up against the receiver, and the bolt handle itself can be used. as a bearing surface. There's minor changes to the magazine, and the stock was made thicker because some rifles were cracking. After the 1898 comes the 1899, which is really just a shorter carbine version for mounted use. And later updates in 1901 and 1902 were mainly just sight upgrades. The evolution of sights for the Krag is filled with drama, and there's tons of sights. There's like 5 different models, and that's a video all on its own. So if you want to deep dive into the specifics of each of the model upgrades as well as the sight drama, let me know and I will make it. But what never changed throughout the development of the Krag were it always maintains its side-loading gate, rotary magazine system, and its single lug bolt. I just do want to note that Krag and Jørgensen did patent a 2-lug design. The US just never moved to it because they wanted to move to the Mauser. That's it. And I want to bring up real quick, because I feel like I've talked a lot of negative about this rifle. Soldiers really did love it. They loved the smooth bolt throw. The rifle is balanced excellently. It's very reliable, and it's pretty accurate, especially compared to the older muskets that were laying around with the trapdoors. It's very much a marksman's rifle, which makes sense because before we adopted this rifle, Americans had already developed a very marksmanship, one shot, one kill sort of doctrine and mentality, which carries over into our rifles as we start to realize that we need to be repeating and volume of fire and all that. America still maintains that one shot, one kill marksmanship mentality that it had in our single shot soldier. But like I said several times already, we did move to the Mauser in the Springfield 1903, which will have a video coming soon. We go to stripper clip loading, a stronger action, higher velocity cartridges. We move from the round nose to the Spitzer, and we're able to keep up with that faster sustained fire we were talking about. Ironically, the US had to pay Mauser royalties, which is kind of another quiet admission that the Krag period was over. At first glance, the Krag doesn't intimidate you. It doesn't shout. It doesn't bristle with sharp edges or aggressive lines. Instead, it feels considered. This is a rifle that looks like it was designed to be handled, not merely used. Bring it to your shoulder and you notice it immediately. The way the stock flows, the way the wrist narrows just enough, the way your cheek settles naturally along the comb. Nothing is abrupt, nothing is harsh. It's almost polite. And that's not an accident. This rifle was born in a moment when engineers still believed that elegance and military utility could coexist. When ergonomics mattered, long before anyone used the word. Then there's the magazine, the side-loading gate. Criticized by historians, argued over by tacticians, but visually, it's the soul of the rifle. That curved loading door breaks the symmetry of the Krag in a way that feels intentional, almost organic. It opens like a hinged case, not a feeding port. There's something almost sculptural about it, like a detail you'd expect on a fine sporting rifle rather than a service arm. It gives the Krag character. It reminds you that this rifle wasn't designed in a vacuum of efficiency charts. It was shaped by human hands and human taste. And then there's the bolt. Anyone who's ever cycled a Krag knows the feeling. It's not sharp, it's not fast. It's smooth. It's confident. The single locking lug and sweeping bolt handle produce an action that doesn't rush you. It glides. It feels deliberate. The sound it makes is muted, almost respectful. This isn't a rifle built for frantic motion. It's a rifle built for measured marksmanship. The steel doesn't dominate the wood. It rests within it. Wood and metal, feeling like partners rather than rivals. This comes from a time when service rifles were still thought of as personal arms, when a soldier's rifle wasn't just a tool of war, but an extension of the individual carrying it. Many Krags feel closer to bespoke sporting rifles than battlefield equipment, and that's why they resonate today. They feel human. The Krag does not pretend to be modern. It does not pretend to be fast. It does not pretend to be indestructible. It is honest. It represents the last breath of an older world. A world where craftsmanship still mattered, where warfare had not yet fully industrialized, and where beauty hadn't been entirely sacrificed for efficiency. The 1898 Krag-Jorgensen succeeds not because it overwhelms you, but because it rewards you for slowing down, for looking closer, for running the bolt, for feeling the stock. And in a world of increasingly brutal mechanical weapons, that restraint, that quiet confidence, may be the greatest beauty of all. The Krag-Jorgensen rifle leaves us a legacy that we need to remember. It's the end of black powder doctrine in America, the beginning of modern American infantry arms. It's a transitional design, stuck between philosophies of 19th and 20th century warfare. It wasn't wrong, it was early. And sometimes, that can be worse. This rifle disappeared because history was moving faster than the rifle could evolve. But it taught the US Army what modern war demanded. Faster reloads, higher sustained fire, stronger actions, and flatter shooting cartridges. And once we learned those lessons, the Krag had done its job. It never had the battlefield longevity of the Springfield 1903. It never earned its mythos of the Garand. And it's never benefited from nostalgia and Americana that is fueled by wars. Instead, the Krag became America's forgotten service rifle, quietly eclipsed by the very future it helped create. But if you can appreciate and understand the Krag, then you understand the moment that America stepped into modern warfare, and realizing that we had some catching up to do. Sometimes the most important rifles in histories aren't the ones that stayed around the longest, they're the ones that showed us where we needed to go next. If you've ever ran a Krag bolt, you understand why this rifle still has its admirers. Remind yourself that history isn't made by perfect weapons, but by the necessary ones. It didn't win America's wars, but it taught us how to fight the next ones. And we did win. Happy 250th.